Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about why I finally moved on from SmartThings and moved on to the great Home Assistant world. So without further ado, here we go. So after 6 years, I decided to finally move on from SmartThings. Over the years, I thought it's a pretty good product and it really satisfied most of our requirements that we needed. And I always looked at other options, and for the most part, I thought it was a grass is greener on the other side type of situation where it wouldn't really benefit us to switch over. And for several years, maybe it wouldn't have. Maybe SmartThings really was our answer for that time. But times change, and definitely Home Assistant is the answer now. And there's really three main reasons why we made the switch and why I'm very thankful we did. So let's get into those. The first reason, if you're a SmartThings user or have known Home Assistant for quite some time, is going to really surprise you. And that is the user interface. That's actually a real benefit at this point of moving from SmartThings over to Home Assistant. And you're going to say, whoa, whoa, whoa. Doesn't Home Assistant, require YAML coding, and it's not very friendly? You need to do it, browser based. That's really not the case anymore. That used to be the case, but they've really improved the UI over the years. And most of the items you can now do directly in the UI, right from the app, and it's very seamless and extremely powerful. And that's, a real contradiction in comparison to the SmartThings more recently. They used to have web core and they discontinued that, and they discontinued some of the other functionality. And I believe some of that was based on some of the cloud services they had subscribed to, and we're getting a lot of pings and some issues there. And that's going to lead to some of our other issues and some of the other reasons we switched over as well as some of that cloud. But they've really decreased what you can do with SmartThings based on some of your pre-existing automations and triggers and those types of things. Like I said, they discontinued WebCore, which was extremely powerful, although cloud-based. It definitely satisfied a lot of the requirements that folks had to automate things in a very advanced and technical environment. Home Assistant, on the other hand, like I said, moved over from YAML only to a much more in-depth UI, and they're constantly making improvements. I believe a month or two ago, they added drag and drop to make it even more seamless when you're working in some of those advanced automations where you can do those directly in the UI. They also have some other options. You could use Node-RED or some other options such as blueprints, where there's a user base that comes up with blueprints for automations that you can utilize so you don't have to start from scratch. So there's a lot of benefits in the UI at this point for Home Assistant. Home Assistant hasn't shut down any of its services. Like I mentioned with SmartThings, they did shut down the web core, and they've discontinued some of the other automations that were built in. They tried to replace some of those. They also discontinued different drivers and tried to replace those. And it's been a nightmare over the last few years trying to make sure you're keeping up, because you can't set it and forget it kind of thing with SmartThings. If you have anything more advanced, you better be watching the forums and reading what's coming, or else you're going to be, left in the dark, and maybe literally left in the dark if you have automation set up for your lights and they aren't triggering because maybe they're web core, or the drivers aren't supported, or they changed something else and it broke some of the integrations that you were using. Whatever the case may be, it's really a complex environment. And one of the benefits that SmartThings was supposed to have is a set it and forget it type setup. But they've really strayed from that, unfortunately, over the last few years. Maybe outside their control to an extent, but they're doing nothing to keep control within. I mean, they don't even make their own hubs anymore for the main hubs. They make their refrigerators and such, but the main hub is actually made by Aerotech now. So it's very concerning to me that they control everything, but they don't actually keep everything in house. And on the Home Assistant side, they're constantly expanding that support, and they're also retaining the legacy support. So if you do like to code in YAML and that's where your comfort zone is, or you think you can achieve more, doing it that way, because you're really proficient, then you can certainly continue to do that. But if you like the UI, you can do that. You can actually even do sort of a mix of YAML and UI, because within the UI you can select a YAML option. So if you have something that's not supported natively in the UI, you can actually go in and code it if it's in like an automation directly within there. Or if you can't find it and you know what it is, what the YAML is, you can go in and add the YAML that way and do it right on your phone, that type of thing. So it's really a benefit at this point for Home Assistant. So oddly enough, Home Assistant actually wins the UI battle. The second reason we switched is compatibility. So I told you there were three. This is a pretty big one for us, and that's because SmartThings wasn't always compatible with some of our devices or some of the things we'd like to integrate. And some of the things it was compatible with, they tended to break, when using SmartThings. And it was partially SmartThings' fault, partially Samsung's fault, and partially the other developers' faults when they wouldn't keep up with some of the changes. And to Samsung's credit, there were times where they gave enough notice that the other developers could have, taken action and implemented the changes so that it would stay current with the SmartThings environment, and they chose not to. But it's a really difficult environment to stay within when it is constantly changing. So the compatibility is one of the key reasons that we switched. And some of the items that are compatible with Home Assistant that were not compatible with SmartThings, at least natively in an environment that was stable, in my opinion, are the Wise cameras, the iRobot, vacuum cleaners, and mops, which I did have working from time to time, but it seemed to be hit or miss with those. And our Tesla vehicle, that's another one that works great with Home Assistant, but was not integrated with SmartThings. So there's plenty of other examples, but these are just a couple that come to mind for me that really changed in our smart home and the integration that's available there. As I had mentioned, some of the integrations would also break as there were updates to the SmartThings environment. That certainly can happen in Home Assistant as well, but it seemed to be much more regular in SmartThings, and they also would shove the updates for SmartThings onto your devices, so your hub would automatically update. You didn't really have any control. So if you needed to delay that because of an integration that's going to have an issue, you really couldn't do anything about it. You just had to suffer the consequences when Samsung decided to push it out to your SmartThings hub, and you would have to deal with it later, or remove that integration, or remove those automations, or just deal with things not working. And the integrations that are available with SmartThings is much more limited than Home Assistant, just overall. So with SmartThings, they tended to have a pretty good user base. Actually, I love the forum there. I thought there were lots of great folks there, always willing to help and even write custom code. But what would happen is Samsung would make it difficult to keep up on the custom code because they would switch environments and switch other requirements, and it made it difficult for the developers, who are usually doing this just on their own time as a courtesy to their fellow, innovators and automators. It was a situation where the developers weren't always able to keep up on the code updates. So that's really a negative for SmartThings, with the way they were breaking things and making it difficult for folks to have that custom code. And on the other hand, Home Assistant does a great job of bringing all of the innovators together, the developers, and it's a really great community. And I think lots of information there, a much larger community base than what SmartThings had. Even though, like I said, I did like the folks over in the community on SmartThings, it definitely pushed us over to Home Assistant with all of the available custom integrations there and blueprints and those types of things. The final compatibility item that I wanted to mention was the integration with Apple. So how I had SmartThings tied into Apple was utilizing Homebridge, which I was running on a PC locally, and then serving the devices over to Apple and bringing the Apple devices over to SmartThings and being able to have the two communicate together in one way or another. I would say that was flaky at best. I'm not a big fan of Homebridge. It seemed to have issues with staying online and required frequent restarts. I'm not sure if that was, something with the machine I was running it on or what that, might have been because I was running on a virtual machine. So there could have been some issues with the setup there. I'm, not overly familiar with that type of system, but that's really a difficulty when SmartThings is supposed to be the more streamlined environment that you're sort of hacking through to get things to work together. And it was a really difficult setup that, to keep it working 100% of the time, we'll say. Not necessarily a difficult setup initially, but just that reliability wasn't there for us. On the other hand, Home Assistant has worked great integrated directly with Apple. I should say that both work properly with the Amazon Assistant as well as the Google Home Assistant. So it's really Apple that, if you're using an Apple device, Home Assistant would be the preferred method. In our house, we're actually using all three. So we have the Amazon Assistant, Google Home, as well as some of the Apple devices, the HomeKit devices, as well as iPhones, iPads, Apple Watch. We have those kind of devices. So we have all three blended together, and Home Assistant works much better across the board. And that really leads into the third and final reason that we switched over to Home Assistant. Make sure you don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps me and I appreciate it. And this reason is control. So with the control, we have a lot of flexibilities. So one of the things I just mentioned was that we can integrate SmartThings or Home Assistant with Google Home or the Amazon Assistant. But every time I would do that with SmartThings, and I would pull over all of our SmartThings devices into Google Home, we also had Lutron directly connected so that when SmartThings would be updating or doing anything else, we could still control it with their voice directly through the Lutron cassetta setup. What would happen is Lutron would have the devices in Google where we wanted them, but SmartThings would also put them there. So we ended up with duplicate devices, and we have about 70 couple Lutron devices. So what I ended up having to do is go through device by device, find the one served up by SmartThings, and then I put it into a new home that was a duplicate home just because of SmartThings. Once we moved over to Home Assistant, we were able to switch, pick which items we wanted to put into Google Home or the Amazon Assistant, and only expose those particular devices, which is much better. So there we get the option. With everything running locally, we could certainly run the Lutron switches directly through the Lutron connection or through the Home Assistant. And it really doesn't make much difference because Home Assistant, we've had, really high reliability there, and we haven't had the forced updates because you get to choose when you update Home Assistant. And that's really the next piece of the control is controlling the environment. So we bought the Home Assistant Green, which has been a great device. Maybe it's not, the best device for you, but for us, it's been great. It was a plug and play setup, much easier setup than I expected, given what I had read about Home Assistant in the past. It's really streamlined, and UI is pretty good on this at this point. So we were able to, plug and play a couple of USB hubs for the Zigbee and Z-Wave. Lutron and a whole bunch of other, setups were extremely easy, and it was able to be integrated very quickly, much easier actually than trying to remove them from the SmartThings hub. That was the difficult piece of moving everything over, was getting SmartThings to play nicely with the deleting of the devices and removing them from the connection to it, its mesh network. And mentioning the updates, when SmartThings would update, you would have issues from time to time. There were numerous times where they would stop updates in the middle or delay updates. They would, in their defense, give you usually a few days or maybe a week or two notice of an update coming, but you couldn't control it at all. It would say, starting on this date at this time and continuing through this date at this time, and then as available, it would just push it out to you, and you couldn't control anything. It typically didn't take your hub offline long, but sometimes it created issues for you. So if you were on vacation and you weren't readily available, or if you were busy during that period of time and it wasn't a convenient time to try to troubleshoot, it didn't really matter. With Home Assistant, what I've tended to do since I moved over is wait for the updates and let them roll out, and typically wait till around the end of the month and monitor. Around that time, if it's causing anybody any issues, just check the forums, that type of thing, pretty quickly. And if I don't see any issues, and read the notes quickly, and then I'll update at that point. Thus far, I haven't had any issues. And reading the forums, it sounds like Home Assistant has been doing a much better job recently at not breaking things and being totally transparent on the updates and potential issues there. So several months worth of updates, no issues for me. And as I said, other folks said it's been improving recently as well. The final and most important part of control for us is that moving over to Home Assistant from SmartThings allows us to figure out and control much better when we're using the cloud. So SmartThings has the ability to process things locally, and it does sometimes, especially more so since they moved away from the environment where they're running web core and everything else. They've moved many more things on the hub, but I think that was really for their benefit, limiting the cloud pinging and the processing and that type of thing. But not everything runs local that could. So it's a really weird setup where some things run local and some don't, and you really can't control which ones do. Even if you're picking things that should run local, sometimes they won't. So it's a really weird environment. And that also caused a lot of issues with integrations where it wasn't a local integration, so you'd have to ping the server. So that meant you're reliant on Samsung as well as the other company. So you're relying on two companies that you have no real control over. And that's a real benefit of the Home Assistant, where you have a lot of control over what is done locally. Yes, we do have some cloud-based devices. Some of them are actually redundant at this point, such as the evil MyQ integration with our garage doors. Watch the video linked above if you want to check that out and see what we replaced that with. That's local and integrated through the Apple HomeKit integration. But we have other options that, other things that are remote as well. The Tesla, for example, that's a web-based integration, so that one's obviously not local. The geofencing, where we utilize our cell phones for our location and can trigger things when we arrive or leave from different, locations, including our home. That's obviously not a local integration because the devices aren't here when that's happening at all times. Our thermostat actually is a Wi-Fi thermostat. Looking at switching over to a local integration there, but I haven't done that one yet. So that's another example. But most of our devices are local, and I will say most of our devices previously with SmartThings were local as well, because we stuck mostly to Zigbee and Z-Wave devices. But like I mentioned, we had these Lutron devices that we would integrate, and that's a local integration with the Home Assistant hub, as well as several other things that were never local integrations with SmartThings. They are with Home Assistant, and it's very apparent when you're looking at your integrations. They put a little icon there, so immediately you know what's local, what's not, and can work off of that. So having that local processing with the local functionality, we aren't reliant on the internet or the other company to maintain any connection or keep up their servers or anything like that. no subscriptions with anything that's local because we control it all. So it's a much better environment, and having that control really creates the reliability that's really important in a smart home. You want it to just work, and ironically enough, that was one of the reasons we went with SmartThings years ago, and it's one of the main reasons we're switching away from it to Home Assistant. I hope you enjoyed this video, and here are a couple other videos for you to check out as well.